What's up, guys? This is Colin from Dark Souls Players. This is our inaugural video, and I thought what better video to start this channel off on than an introduction to Dark Souls. I want to make this first video about the starting classes, the burial gifts, as well as the stats, so that you can learn a little more about Dark Souls as you're getting started into this wonderful game. This video is not only catered towards beginners, but also for those of you who have already played Dark Souls 1 and 2. There are changes that have been made that are important to note, so I highly recommend that you watch this video and show it to others as they get ready to get started in Dark Souls 3. We are starting this brand new channel with the hopes to make more of these videos that are no nonsense and get right into the stuff, but before I do that, a couple preliminary advertisements for us. Our new page is called Dark Souls Players. We're looking to get at least 100 subscribers to get things rolling on YouTube. We have a Facebook page, Dark Souls Players. We also have a GoFundMe account that we would appreciate any donations at all for to help make these videos happen and make them bigger and better. All right, let's get started into this. Now, Dark Souls guides and websites have always said that your starting class is not a big deal. You've probably read articles that have said, don't worry about your class, you can always overcome it. And that's mostly true, but in the same breath, it's also not true. Starting classes are very important in Dark Souls, in my opinion, because they get you started on the right foot and they prevent you from having to worry about too many of the different stats as you get started. So before we get into the classes, let's actually talk about the levels here. And I'm sorry, all the stats that you can level up in. So just a quick tip, one of the nice things in Dark Souls is that, as you can see on the bottom of your screen, it'll say to hit the left side of the trackpad if you want help. When you are making a character, you can hit that and then click explanation, and it will show you a detailed information about each stat and what they control. Now, unfortunately, these are just very generic. Dark Souls is very famous for that. So you have to rely on the internet and guides and this video to have more information about these stats. So let me give you my own explanation here. So level is pretty straightforward. That's what level the character will start out as. This is important because whatever level you start out as, those levels and stats cannot be respec. Later on, there is a secret covenant that you can find where you can respec your character and reallocate the points that you have leveled up with if you wish. You will not be able to do that from whatever level the character started at, though. It's not like if you're level 9, you have 9 levels that you can respec. It's anything after that. So level 10 and forward can be respec. So starting level is actually very important, especially if you want to make something in your own build. All the different classes have different starting levels, and they all have different stat allocations. But let's talk about what each of those stats are. So the first stat is Vigor. Vigor is the stat that governs HP and frost resistance. And let me just answer right off the bat. Many of you will ask, frost resistance, is that a big deal? Especially for those of you that have played Skyrim before and have wondered why all the frost resistance, right? Frost is actually a very minimal attribute in this game. It's not something really to worry about much. You would definitely not level up Vigor for frost resistance. You would level it up to increase your health. Vigor is a very important stat in this game. But in the same breath, if you are an experienced player, you can probably deal with the starting Vigor for a long time. I actually didn't even touch Vigor in my first playthrough until about halfway to 3/4 through the game, and took a very, as my brother-in-law calls it, a glass cannon approach. So there is another term that I need to, for those of you who are starting out in Dark Souls, I need to acquaint you with, and that is soft cap. Soft cap of every stat is referring to a cap of levels that you can put into that stat where you start to see diminished returns. So for example, if every level of Vigor you are getting 100 HP added, at some point you'll hit a level where you won't get 100 HP anymore, you'll start getting 50 HP. Now, of course, that's not the case in Dark Souls. I'm just giving you whole numbers to explain that. But you have to understand that that's what a soft cap is. It doesn't mean that you can't level past that. It's just diminished returns, and you're better off leveling up something else. So Vigor is HP and frost resistance. The soft cap for it is actually a little finicky. In Dark Souls 3, they've changed some of these stats to where they have randomish kind of ups every time you put it up. They don't go up by the same amount every single time you level the stat. But right between level 25 and 28, you start to see the soft cap come in for Vigor. I recommend just having Vigor at 20. You can go higher if you want to, if you are really dependent on having a lot of health. but if you're really good at defensive things like parrying and rolling and just overall just not getting hit, you don't need to worry about Vigor as much. The next stat we have is Attunement. Attunement controls your amount of spells and miracles and hexes and pyromancies and all those special things that you can have equipped on the up button of your D-pad and use with its appropriate device. Attunement has changed a lot from Dark Souls 1 and 2. Attunement, first of all, is not as simple as Dark Souls 1. I'm a big fan of Dark Souls 1 over 2, and I know many people are. Dark Souls 1, one of the nice things is roughly speaking, every 2 levels was an additional attunement slot. So all attunement slots are is there are more slots to be able to equip miracles, spells, pyromancies, etc. Some of them actually require 2 spots to even equip in the first place for the stronger ones that are out there. So Attunement has actually changed in that regard. It's a lot harder to gain additional slots in Dark Souls 3. Attunement starts you out with 1 slot at 10, and then at 14 you get 2. So now instead of having every 2 levels being a slot, it's now every 4 for the first 2 levels of Attunement. So at level 10 you have 1 slot, at level 14 you have 2, at level 18 you have 3, and then after that it goes +6 twice, and then +10. So that means that if you want 4 slots, you need to have 24 attunement, 5 slots is 30 attunement, 6 slots is 40 attunement, and 7 is 50 attunement. Now that's a lot of levels to be dumping into attunement, so rest assured, if you want more slots without doing all that work and putting it into attunement, there are rings that you can get in Dark Souls 3 to equip and add extra attunement slots without needing any levels attached to it. There are actually 3 different rings that affect that. So one other thing that attunement affects on top of the amount of spells, miracles, pyromancies you can equip is your focus power, or FP for short, which is basically mana, as you've seen in other games, or magic power, or MP, as you might be familiar with in other games. It's the blue bar that you would see while you're playing the game. Focus power is used for your miracles, your pyromancies, etc. They have shifted from Dark Souls 1 mechanic of having a stock amount of casts to having a magic bar. I know there's a big debate about which is better. Personally, I think that the way they've done it in Dark Souls 3 has actually made it better, because that way you can cast as many times as you want if you continue to consume Ash and Estus flasks to recharge. There's also a wonderful ring called Aldrich's Sapphire that you can get early on in the game that'll let you get focus power back when you do critical hits, which is really nice. But anyway, the nice thing that I want to point out about Attunement is not only are you getting slots as you go through Attunement, but as you're dredging through it, you're also at least getting your focus power up, which is really nice. You can use more weapon arts that way, as well as more miracles and etc. without having to recharge. The next stat is Endurance. Endurance has made a major change in Dark Souls 3. Endurance in Dark Souls 1 used to be not only stamina, but also equip load. So every time you pump that stat, you would get more stamina and equip load. The powers that be with Dark Souls 3 realized that that was actually not a good idea, because then you were letting people be able to wear gigantic armor and have a ton of stamina at the same time, making it very unfair to level up that stat. So they have decided to split that between endurance and vitality. So endurance is the stat that governs stamina. It also governs lightning and bleed resist. Now, lightning and bleed resist, unlike frost resistance, those 2 stats are ones that you're going to encounter fairly decently in Dark Souls 3. But again, stamina is the big thing that's affected by endurance. 40 is the soft cap for that one as well. I do not recommend heading to that in one playthrough. I would recommend to float around 20 and be comfortable in there. I've found that right around that amount will allow you to swing your greatsword twice if you're using an ultra greatsword and roll away, or get a 3rd hit in if you'd like. That would be my recommendation, is once you pick a weapon you're comfortable with, find out how many swings that you can take with your endurance and do whatever you like in the amount of swings per attack, plus enough to roll away, and that's a good endurance number to shoot for. Vitality, as I said already, is basically the other half of the old endurance stat. Vitality is where equip load has gone. So now there is a dedicated stat for equip load on your character. Vitality affects not only equip load, but it also affects poison resistance and physical defense. But equip load is the major governing stat of vitality. So equip load is not how much you're carrying, it's how much you have equipped. So when you have a shield equipped and a sword equipped, those both have weights to them, and that will encumber you. One really nice thing in Dark Souls 3 is that they no longer make you have to bust out a calculator and figure out what your equip percentage is. You need to have under 70%, which you'll see as a decimal value in the top right when you're playing the game and you're in your status menu. You need to be below 70% to be able to have a normal roll. Above 70%, you'll have diminished endurance recovery, and you'll also have a fat roll where you won't have a big roll and you won't be able to get away quickly. So vitality is very important for those of you that care about having decent armor or even heavy armor. Now, vitality is not something that really has any kind of soft cap to it. You continue to get 1 full point of equip load each time you pump up vitality. But for those of you who like wearing really heavy armor or like having the choice of kind of wearing whatever you want and want to go for a heavier build, like a greatsword build or something of that nature, I recommend having 32 vitality for your first playthrough. That'll allow you to wear basically any armor piece you want, carry a torch at all times, wear any 4 rings you want, and be able to use most ultra great swords pretty comfortably. Now, obviously, if you're going for something lighter, if you're going for like a regular sword and shield build or something of that nature, you don't need to have vitality pumped up that much. Vitality is something that you can really just go touch and go with. Is basically just pick what you would want to have equipped, see how much you're over by, and then continue to pump vitality until you're under 70%. Realize also that once you get about a quarter of the way into the game, you will find a optional boss. If you go up a large ladder in the poison swamp, you will find a demon that you can kill and then put his soul into the transposition back at Firelink Shrine, and that will enable you to get Havel's Ring, the very coveted Havel's Ring. That'll give you roughly 10% increase in equip load, so that'll help keep that stat down as well for you without needing to level it up too much. But again, I recommend 32 if you're going for a heavy build. Too much vitality, by the way, it makes the game a lot easier, and I think it kind of takes the fun out of it if you can just keep taking hits and not get better at being technically good at this game. So just something to think about with vitality. Now, strength, dexterity, or dex for short, intelligence, and faith, these 4 stats are referred to, in my opinion, as build stats or class stats. I would call them that because they're totally dependent on what kind of character you're building and what you're going for, mostly. Now, each of these 4 stats have a soft cap of around 40, and that means for things like intelligence and faith, that's just referring to weapons that scale with that. We'll start to have diminished scaling beyond that stat. Now, these, again, are totally dependent on what you're going for. Strength and dexterity do not necessarily control specific facets of your weapon. They control whether or not you can actually equip it. That's the big thing. They also do give scaling bonuses to different weapons. You'll see letter grades ranging from A to E on how much they scale with a certain stat, which means they'll get bonus damage depending on your stat for that, shown by a plus and a number value next to its normal attack power. Now, strength and dex is something that you'll really have to experiment with on your first playthrough, but if you're going for a particular weapon set, I highly recommend that you have a first playthrough that's very exploratory, and then look at the weapons that you like, look at the shields that you like, look at the everything around that you like, and see what the requirements for them are, and then frame your next build around that to make it even better. Now, I've already done that for you in some regards, so let me just say, as an advice to you, you're going to want to have a strength of around 15 at the start of the game. And for dex, the soft cap, again, is around 40 for that. I recommend a dex of 18 on the first run through. And of course, you can play with that if you're going for more one-handed weapons. Strength weapons are like great swords, ultra great swords, things of that nature. Every weapon has a strength and dex requirement, but you don't need as much strength for like the one-handed stuff like regular swords and katanas and things of that nature. But a dex of 18 will allow you to use a lot of the weapons in this game, and it'll be very helpful to have that stat there. But of course, strength and dex are both gauging on what you're making for a character. Now, intelligence is something that is used as a requirement to be able to use pyromancies and different things of that nature. I highly recommend, no matter what you're doing, even if you're not a magic guy like me, have an intelligence of 10. That'll give you access to all the NPCs, because there is one NPC that won't talk to you if you're below 10 in intelligence. There are also a few weapons in this game that have special benefits to them, and because of that, they have an intelligence requirement on top of a strength and dex requirement. So you're going to want to have at least 10 intelligence, so that way you can use special weapons in this game just for that. And a lot of the starting classes are floating around there anyway. Last of the class stats is Faith, and Faith is one of my favorite stats in all of Dark Souls, in Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, because it governs miracles, and there are also certain things in the game that are scaled with Faith too. But miracles have really been revamped a lot in Dark Souls 3. There's the addition of dark miracles now, so there's some more offensive miracles in your arsenal, as well as some buffs that can be cast, and some really cool heal spells too. Dark Souls 1, the big struggle was getting your Faith really high so you could be a medic and heal other people on top of yourself. Dark Souls 3, they start that pretty much right off the bat in this game, which is very nice. What should you have for Faith? Now, some people will say, don't worry about Faith if you're not interested in miracles, but truthfully, having Faith at least 12 is highly recommended for any build, because that'll allow you to be able to use the heal miracle. There is one lower level miracle called Heal Aid, which will let you heal a little bit of HP for just yourself, but if you get Faith 12, you can use regular heal, which heals more health, and it heals anybody that's standing pretty much right around you, and it'll heal them too. It's great for healing summons, especially NPC summons, to bring their health back up, especially if they run out of flasks and you need them alive. It is a very valuable thing to have, especially if you've run out of Estus and you can have as a fallback. You can have some heals to use in that regard when it's safe to use them. Now, if you are going for a Faith build and you like that kind of stuff and you want to pump that up more, the next number you're going to want to hit for is 25, because 25 is when you can use medium heal, which is the next level up from the heals on that. Of course, there's a lot of other things you can do with Faith, but healing is a big part of Faith, and so those are the numbers I would aim for, is a minimum of 12, and if you're going for Faith, to pump that even higher. Now, luck, the final stat, is like many games where it's a very bizarre stat. Many people wonder why it's even a thing, but it's there, and it's very similar to every other game in some ways, but it also has some unique aspects to it too. So luck, like many games, is the stat of item discovery. The higher it is, the more chance you'll have of finding items being dropped on enemies. Now, luck also affects bleed resistance, poison resistance, and curse resistance, all of which are very helpful in this game. They are things that you run into on a fairly regular basis, but item discovery is the big one. Now, like many games, you can have your luck at basically 0 and still, statistically speaking, have the same kind of chances to be able to get stuff, maybe a little less, but you'll still be able to have the chance to get things. You don't need to have a certain value of luck to be able to get items from certain people. There are a few items in this game that will allow you to temporarily increase item discovery, which will greatly help in that regard, so you won't need to level up luck as much if you have access to those items. But one thing I have noticed is that if your luck is not at least 11, you'll notice that it's a lot harder for some reason to get items sometimes. Of course, you still have the statistic chance of getting an item and saying, wow, I'm having really good luck right now. But I've noticed when I've built characters back to back that a character with 9 luck versus a character with 11 luck makes a major difference to me. I've noticed that with my 11 luck character, I was really lucky on the first playthrough and was able to get a lot of the signature things from different enemies pretty quickly. Now, one thing also to note about Dark Souls that makes luck a little more inferior than other games is that when you rest at a bonfire, you not only recover all your health, you get all your Estus flasks back, but you also get all the enemies in the area that are not permakills respawn. So if you want to farm for items, you don't need to be dependent on luck. You can, if you have enough time and patience, you can just continue to kill everything, sit on the bonfire to respawn everybody, rinse and repeat until you get everything you need. So with just basic level luck at luck level 11, I was able to farm for like an hour and get the entire Silver Knight set of just killing Silver Knights. So just goes to show you that luck is not a huge deal. So that is all the stats. Those are what I recommend for that. Let's get down to classes. So now that we've come to classes, as I've pointed out already, all the classes have different stat allocations to them and different starting levels. So it is somewhat true that you can come back from whatever you've made a mistake in, and there is a way to respec later on in the game. But if you know what you want, it's good to start that way, because then you can dump levels very intentionally from the very beginning and not have to worry about a lot of nonsense. So let's go over each of the classes and what their different stat allocations are and what might be a good idea to use that class for. So let's start with the Knight. So of course, Dark Souls always has a basic description that'll help you kind of make your decision for each class as you hover over them. But the stats are the more important thing, as well as the gear that they start with. Now, the Knight is the standard class of Dark Souls. It even wears very standard Dark Souls-y looking armor. A lot of people like to use the Knight, and it's because the Knight is basically a beast right off the bat. As you can look at his stats here, he has a decent amount of vitality. He already has 15 vitality, and as you heard me recommend before, I recommend having about 20 to be in a good position throughout the game. But the Knight has pretty high vitality already and a decent amount of endurance, so he's the kind of build that you want if you don't want to worry about HP and stamina early on in the game. He also starts with a sword and shield, which is very nice to have in the beginning of the game because they're both really good things to start out with. His intelligence, as you can see here, you'll want to pump that up 1 to 10. You will need to put a couple dump levels into luck if you want to get into that first bracket of luck. And you will need to pump up faith a little bit too if you want to start using that first miracle. So he's not ready for a lot of the other stats, but he is in a good place with HP and stamina. So for those of you that are just starting out in the game and want to be able to take some hits without getting obliterated, the Knight is a good class to pick from. But if you are a returning Souls player, or if you are really good at Souls type games and you're starting out in Dark Souls, I actually don't recommend the Knight, because the Knight does not really set you off in kind of any good direction with any of the class stats. He's just good for endurance and vitality and vigor. So that's my 2 cents on the Knight. Now let's look at the Mercenary next. The Mercenary is one of my favorite starting classes for single-handed weapon builds, because the Mercenary starts out with twin swords that you can't get for a decent portion of the game. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of twin blades in this game. It's something that's kind of a rarity in this game, but they're really cool and they have a really sweet weapon arts that go with them. The shield that he starts with is trash. There's not a great physical resistance on it, so you will want to replace that at some point. But the Mercenary, as you can see, is a fairly balanced build. He has that 10 intelligence right off the bat, which is really nice. The luck doesn't need to be pumped up as much, still will need to be. The faith is something that he'll need work on, but note that his dex. His dexterity is really high. You would only need to pump it up twice really to be in a good position with dexterity. So the Mercenary build, I think, is far superior to the Knight build. It has got a great stat spread to it. I highly recommend it. Notice too that the Knight starts at level 9, whereas the Mercenary starts at level 8, so you'll have one more level to play with that is yours to choose as the Mercenary. Now the Warrior is like the Viking kind of guy, right? He starts out with a round shield and an axe. The Warrior has a lot of vigor, which is good for your HP. Vitality is at 11 there. His attunement, as you can see, is very low, making him a terrible class in my opinion. If you want to use any kind of sorcery or miracles or pyromancies or any fun stuff like that, you will need to dump 4 levels into that just to get started to be able to use that, which is super annoying. But as you can see, where he prides himself is having that luck 11 right off the bat, which is really nice, and having a strength of 16. So having a strength at 16 is really nice to have that big attack power in the beginning of the game. Again, though, not one of my favorite classes. I don't really have a recommendation of who should be this one, because I don't like axes either. I don't like to start out with that. In my opinion, he's not one of the best classes there, but he does have some strength to him. Now, the Herald is a new class that has been introduced in Dark Souls 3. It is for people like me who love doing strength faith builds. It is the perfect class for the people that are in that kind of desire there. Now, the Herald starts out at level 9. He has a decent amount of vigor, but notice here a lot of those main stats he starts out with right off the bat. He already has enough faith to use the good heal spell. Notice too that in his inventory he starts out with a heal spell, not the heal spell that I was talking about earlier that heals other people. He starts out with Heal Aid, which is the weakest heal spell, but it's nice because that's 500 souls that you don't have to spend in the beginning of the game. So he can use that. He has luck 11 too right off the bat. But notice here some weak parts of him. He has very low dexterity to start out with. He will need to put a couple points into intelligence, and his endurance is pretty low as well. You'll want to pump that up too. But he already starts out with an attunement slot. He already starts out with a faith and a miracle that's already part of him too to heal with. And he starts out with a spear. And the best part about the Herald on top of all of that is this shield that he starts with has 100 physical resistance. Shields have percentages of how much damage they will resist, and having a 100 resist for physical is clutch in Dark Souls, because then you can block basically anything and not take damage from it. There are some weapons that break through that and you will get hurt by, like weapons that cause bleed or weapons that have buffs on them. But in general, this shield is one of the best shields in the entire game, and the Herald starts out with it for some reason. His armor is also pretty decent too, making the Herald my preferred class to start out with in this game, and one of the ones I would highly recommend. The other thing I would say too is the Herald is really good for beginners in my opinion too, because you start out with that spear and that gives you some distance to deal with, so you don't have to get right up in people's faces as you're trying to learn the combat of this game. Another interesting thing to note here too is that with the Herald starts out with the same amount of HP as the coveted Knight. They both have a vigor of 12. The endurance on the Herald is a bit lower though, so his stamina, it leaves some thing to be desired there, so note that. Now, the Thief was Dark Souls 1's favorite class in many ways, because the Thief started out with already in his inventory a master key that would unlock a lot of doors for you in the beginning of the game, so you could pick a different starting gift to go out with in the game, which is really nice. The Thief also starts with a really sweet dagger that has a nice critical buff, so when you backstab with it or guard break through it, it does a lot of damage. So the Thief is all about dexterity and using those kind of gear to it. He starts with a pretty sweet little armor here too, with having that sweet hood and face mask that go with it. As you can see though, the Thief is a little bit weak. I mean, he has a very low level. He starts out at level 5, so it gives you more to customize with, but a lot of his stats start fairly low, so it leaves some to be desired. He does have that 10 intelligence, but his dexterity and his strength are pretty low. His vitality is really low. His vigor is at 10. His endurance is a little bit higher though, so for those of you that want more stamina and feel like you can control your HP more, maybe he's a better one to do. He does waste some points in luck though. As you can notice here, he's at luck 14, so that will buff his item discovery a little bit, but again, that's not a major thing you need to be concerned with, making the Thief, in my opinion, one of the classes you probably don't want to start with either in Dark Souls 3. Now, the Assassin is another interesting thing that has been done. The Thief and the Assassin were always kind of similar in other games, and really one class, but now they've split them into two separate classes here. The Assassin starts with this kind of rapier and small shield. He has 14 attunement, which is nice, which means he starts out with 2 attunement slots, which is really, really nice. And his dexterity is decently high as well. His luck only needs to be pumped a little bit, and his faith only needs to be pumped a little bit. His intelligence already meets that 10 requirement stat to really go through and get all the NPCs. So not a bad build. The only complaint that I have about the Assassin is that when you start out with these kind of rapiers or pointed swords in the beginning of the game, they're very boring in my opinion, because they have a lot of thrusts. People like them because you can just keep poking and poke through people's guard, but it's a very boring weapon to use. But people like them, and there's a class for it. Now, the next class is a sorcerer class. The sorcerer has very high intelligence, which is really nice if you plan on using a lot of spells or pyromancies. He also starts with 16 attunement, which is really nice. So with 2 more levels into attunement, he'll have 3 slots to deal with right off the bat. As you can see, though, his vigor and endurance are very low, as is his vitality. The reason why the vitality is so low on these 3 classes here is because they're not meant to wear heavy armor. Although, of course, you can change that if you wish by pumping up that stat. His luck is already in a decent spot. Faith, very low. So for those of you who want to pursue spells over miracles, this might be a really good build for you. But realize that if you want to use spells and like heavier gear, you're really going to have a lot to level up in this character off the bat to get into a good position. Now, the Pyromancer is a favorite for many. The Pyromancer is often considered one of the classes that you would pick with to make the game harder. You start out with the Pyromancy Flame, so you would think, wow, if you've already got Pyromancies to deal with, then you should be really decent at that point. Well, that's true in some regards, that it saves you some money and time in that regard. But notice here that the faith is really good. The luck leaves a little bit to be desired. The intelligence is a little overkill, but you would need it for pyromancies. The strength and dex are also a little bit on the lower side, but decent. The vigor and endurance are pretty decent too. The attunement is at 12. So all in all, the pyromancer is pretty nice, but he starts out with this little axe and he starts out with a pyromancy hand and kind of junky armor on his head, as you can see here. So you would need to equip something else to get a little bit of better defense at that point. But notice his vitality is very low. So pyromancers are all about wearing robes as they cast their pyromancies and not having high equip loads. So again, if you want to be a character that wears armor and looks cool in that way, instead of wearing clothing, you are going to want something other than the pyromancer to accomplish that. But he starts out with decent stuff there. If this is your first time playing Dark Souls, I highly discourage you from choosing Pyromancer or Sorcerer. Magics and Pyromancies are things you want to play around with at some point, and then when you feel comfortable with them, come back and make a character that's really good at them. So the Cleric is also like that. The Cleric is like the Herald in that they're both oriented towards miracles. As you can see, the Cleric starts with 2 miracles. He also starts with 14 attunement, so he has 2 slots to equip them right off the bat. He has really good faith too, but low endurance again, very low vitality too. Clerics are also made to wear robes off the beginning of the game. Their intelligence is also low too. You need to pump that up 3 to get it into that coveted 10 slot. And dexterity is very painfully low as well for the Cleric. So in my opinion, I think a lot of people would pick Cleric because they wanted miracles in the past Dark Souls games, but now with the invention of the Herald class, we don't really need the Cleric anymore. We can use miracles and still be having awesome armor and weapons to go with it. So in my opinion, the Herald has kind of eliminated the need for a Cleric, but that is a choice that you can have. Now, the final class is a very famous class in Dark Souls. It is the Deprived class. The Deprived class, as it says here in the description, it is a naked person who doesn't have really anything to use except a wooden plank shield and this very generic club. You don't start out with any kind of miracles or pyromancies or anything special, and that's what makes the Deprived special, because you start at level 1 and everything is at 10. So the disadvantage of the Deprived is that you are going to start the game very, very vulnerable, and you will need to get gear and start throwing it on as quick as possible. But if you're not good at getting through the starting area, the Deprived can be very challenging in that regard. However, it is extremely nice that the Deprived is level 1, so every stat that you pick from moving forward can be respect, and he starts with 10s in every category. So the Deprived has been considered often the challenge class for people who are wanting to start out the game and make it a little bit harder for themselves, and it's also considered the advanced class. Not something for beginners, but you can see here it would be nice to have in general because you've already got luck and faith pretty close to those minimum thresholds. Intelligence is already there. You're already halfway to what I would call the requirement for vitality, vigor, and endurance. I'm sorry, just vigor and endurance on that one, not vitality. You're about a third of the way there on that one. But having 10s and everything is really nice. So something to think about with the classes. All right, so that's classes. Now let's move on to burial gifts, and then we're done. Now, when you pick burial gifts in this game, this is something that used to be called a starting gift or something of that nature. It's called burial gift because you come out of a coffin in the beginning of the game. This is an item that was buried with you when you passed away that you'll be able to use in the beginning of the game and moving forward through the game as an item you start out with on top of what your character already starts out with. Now, in Dark Souls, there's always some items that are better than others in the burial gift, so this is somewhat subjective in some ways, but also very objective in other ways. So I'm going to give you my own 2 cents about each one and what I think is better and worse. So obviously, starting out with none is a bit of a dumb thing to do unless you're trying to challenge yourself in that regard. Notice also, though, that your starting gift is something that you start with. Once you continue on to New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus, you don't get more after that. So it's not like you continue to get another life ring, or another divine blessing after that. You're one and done. So there's really no point in picking none unless you're really trying to be hardcore and not get anything for yourself off the bat. But these items are so minor that why not, right? So the life ring is one that's very recommended as a start item to pick. You can wear 4 rings in Dark Souls 3, which is a major change from Dark Souls 1, where you can only have 2 rings. 4 rings is a very nice thing. The life ring raises maximum HP. So for classes that start with low vigor in the beginning of the game, having a life ring is a nice way to kind of counterbalance that. It is by far one of the best items to start with in Dark Souls 3, and many people would argue that it's the thing you should start out with in Dark Souls 3 because it's something that you have forever on that character. Divine Blessing. Divine Blessing is a one-shot consumable. It is something that fully restores your HP and cures all status effects like poison and things of that nature. It is a very nice item to have kind of as a last ditch if you're in the middle of a boss fight, for example, and all your Estus is done and you want to heal real quick to finish off the boss. It's a nice thing to pop, but you can buy them in the game, and you can find a couple. So it's not something that is really worth picking, in my opinion, but that's what it is. A hidden blessing is basically a divine blessing for your mana or focus power or MP, whatever you want to call it, instead of HP there. And that's not something that you, again, would want to pick. Same thing with Black Firebomb. A Black Firebomb is basically a higher level firebomb. There's regular firebombs, which are brown, and there are black firebombs. Black firebombs are stronger than brown ones, but you can buy these in-game, and they're fairly cheap, so you do not need to start out with a black firebomb in the beginning of the game. A fire gem is a gem that you can use to infuse a weapon with fire damage. If you are planning to pump a lot of stats other than strength and dexterity in your playthrough at the start, having a fire gem is not a horrible idea because then you can make your weapon flame. One quick note I'll make about infusion. I will try to do a separate video for that if there's a want for that. But when it comes to infusion in this game, you can infuse weapons at any point in time without any consequence whatsoever. That is majorly different from Dark Souls 1. In Dark Souls 1, if you went from a normal weapon and made it a divine weapon, for example, it would start a lot of its stats kind of over again, and you'd have to upgrade from there and get your pluses up. Now, when you upgrade your weapon and you have longsword +1, longsword +2, +3, etc., and then you put flame on it, all it does is add the word flame in front of what you already have. So if I infuse a longsword +3 with fire, it's a fire longsword +3. And if I want to level it up more, I still can, and it doesn't take different items to do. It's still the same ones, which is really, really nice in Dark Souls 3. So fire gem, you can infuse your weapon early on and put flame on it, which will add damage to it. That's fire damage. A lot of enemies in this game are fire resistant, though, so I'm not sure how helpful that is. And not to mention, there are some other beneficial items that you can pick here. And fire infusion takes off scaling. So if your weapon has really good scaling stats on it, or scaling grades on it, you don't want to strip those off just to add fire damage. But some people do. Some people really like fire in this game. The next item that you can pick is the Sovereignless Soul. Any item that says something in soul other than the souls you get from bosses you kill are what's called crushed souls. souls that you can actually crush in your hand and add to your soul count. Souls in Dark Souls is the currency of the game. You use souls to buy things, you also use souls to level up, so it's one currency that affects everything. So a sovereignless soul is, in my opinion, one of the best items to start with in the game, because it starts you out with more money to be able to buy things right off the bat, which is really nice. However, if you do certain things at the start of the game, you will be able to start out with a decent amount of souls as is. So it's by no means the item to pick, but it's definitely in my top 2 along with the life ring. Rusted gold coin. Rusted gold coins, as it says in the description up top, greatly increase item discovery for a short while. Emphasis on short. You can find a bunch in the game fairly early on. Not something you need to get here. Cracked red eye orbs. Cracked red eye orbs are one-shot consumables that you can use to invade other people's worlds. They have become a little less helpful to do in Dark Souls 3 without having covenants attached to invasions, because all you get is somebody's souls, and a lot of people in Dark Souls don't carry a lot of souls on them in Dark Souls 3 because there's so many bonfires in Dark Souls 3. So Cracked Red Eye Orb, you'll be able to get a bunch more later on in the game, and some even towards the beginning of the game. And you'll be able to get a permanent Red Eye Orb if you go through Leonard's quests and do his quest line, which is pretty easy to do. If you go just through the beginning third of it, you'll get a permanent red eye orb, so you can always invade people without needing the cracks. So you don't need that one either. The Young White Branch. The Young White Branch is a very interesting item. As of now, the Young White Branch has actually 2 variants to it. If you notice, as you're playing through the game, you'll have Young White Branches that accumulate in your inventory. These Young White Branches are typically used to make yourself blend into the environment and kind of camouflage in, if you will. They are one-shot consumables as well. However, you'll also note that if you make peace with the giant that shoots giant arrows down at you early on in the game, he will give you a Young White Branch, but it has a different item description on it. And it basically is the item that's used to make peace with the giant so that he won't shoot arrows at you, and he'll instead target all the enemies in the game. That is this Young White Branch. You can get it early on so the giant does not shoot you, and instead he will shoot other people. Again, though, every starting gift has a con to it, and the con with this one is that it's not that hard to dodge the giant's arrows in the beginning of the game. It does catch you off guard, but they are fairly easy to run through. There's only a short period where you need to avoid them before you can meet up with him and make peace with him. So, in my opinion, what are the best ones to start with? Probably the Sovereignless Soul or the Life Ring. Some people recommend for your first playthrough to definitely go with the Life Ring and never take it off to have that extra HP. I would say the Sovereignless Soul is another good choice too. Some people will also say the Fire Gem if you're really into having fire buffs. All the other ones are one-shot consumables that you really do not need, and you will end up finding in the world anyway. So something to think about with that. But of course, the choice is yours and for your build. So that is all about starting out in Dark Souls. That's all the stats, that's all the classes, that's all the burial gifts. Hopefully that'll put you in a good place. Once you've picked those, the rest is cosmetics for you. You can make facial presets, and you can actually save different presets in this one so that you can reuse them in the next character that you make, which is really nice. You can make it look as crazy or as awesome as you want, and then once you're done, you can finalize creation and head into the game. One final quick note I'll mention about starting off in Dark Souls is that the name of your character is actually important in Dark Souls 3, unlike Dark Souls 1 and 2. The name in Dark Souls 1 and 2 is basically just a name for your save file to distinguish between different characters. In this one, however, it is the name that can be displayed online when people are looking at you and playing with you. It used to be that it could only be your PlayStation or Xbox or Steam username, but in this one, you can make it in your settings that your name is displayed instead of your PlayStation name or Xbox name, etc. So be careful when you're picking your name there, because if you put any expletives in it or you try to be funny with it, it can be censored and just turned into asterisks. But if you pick a normal name, that will be the name that shows up for other people. So you can identify yourself with pretty sweet names in that regard. One quick thing I'll say about that, and then we're done, is that a lot of people like to use their name as an opportunity to put really stupid things in there, or take names from other Dark Souls characters. A lot of people like calling themselves Artorias. Try to be a little more unique than that and make something that stands out. Try not to make names that sound like NPCs either, because it misleads people who are on their first run and trying to figure out which summons are the NPCs that they need to summon to continue quest lines. And then they summon you and they're confused by that because your name sounds so much like an NPC. So try to make it sound like something that is not an NPC as best as possible. If you can throw a number in there, that usually helps people with that. Obviously not required, obviously something that's just a recommendation there, but it helps with other people. So that's all you need to know about starting out in Dark Souls 3. If you like this video, be sure to comment, subscribe, like it, and let us know on Dark Souls Players Facebook page or on the YouTube page what you would like to see next. We're looking at probably going into talking about infusions as well as doing walkthrough videos moving forward, and some tips and tricks videos too. We hope to see you soon. Be sure to join us in this struggle through Dark Souls. Thanks.